The stars looked different from this far out. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the ancient world of Kelthara Prime grow larger on the view screen. He had been in space for 15 years, but this mission made him nervous in a way combat never had. "Approaching orbit in 10 minutes, sir," Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez said from the pilot's seat. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. She had flown transport missions during the resource wars, and nothing seemed to shake her anymore. Jake nodded and turned to his chief engineer. "Ben, are all our files ready for upload?" Ben Carter looked up from his tablet. "Everything Earth sent us. Complete historical records from the beginning of recorded time to last year. Medical data, cultural archives, military records, everything. I checked it 3 times. Good." Jake trusted Ben completely. The man had helped design Earth's quantum storage systems before joining the diplomatic corps. If he said the files were complete, they were complete. Dr. Sophie Grant walked onto the bridge carrying a stack of data chips. "I brought backup copies, just in case." She was their xenoanthropologist, an expert in alien cultures. She had studied the memory keepers for years and published 2 books about their archive system. "Always prepared," Jake said with a slight smile. Sophie was brilliant but worried too much. "Do you really think we'll need physical backups?" "Probably not," Sophie admitted. "But the memory keepers have existed for 3,000 years. They don't make mistakes with data. If they're saying our records are incomplete, I want to make sure we can prove otherwise." The ship settled into orbit around Kelthara Prime. The planet below was beautiful, covered in crystal forests that reflected light in rainbow patterns. The memory keepers had chosen this world for their archive because it was stable, far from any conflict zones, and naturally rich in the minerals they needed for their data storage crystals. A communication signal came through. An alien voice spoke in perfect English, translated by their systems. "Horizon's edge. You are cleared for landing. Proceed to Archive Complex 7. Amy guided the ship down through the atmosphere. The crystal forests gave way to massive structures that looked like they had grown from the ground rather than been built. Towers of translucent material spiraled upward, connected by bridges that seemed too delicate to support any weight. They landed on a platform that adjusted itself to match their ship's dimensions. Jake had seen adaptive technology before, but this was something else. The platform didn't just reshape itself, it seemed to understand what they needed before they did. "Welcome to Kelthara Prime." The voice came from a being waiting at the edge of the platform. Elder Vriss was tall. Elder Vriss, maybe 8 feet, and her body was made of crystalline material that shifted colors as she moved. She had been a memory keeper for almost 3,000 years, which made her one of the oldest beings Jake had ever met. "Thank you for having us, Elder Vriss," Jake said, following the formal greeting Sophie had taught him. "Please, come inside. We have much to discuss." Vriss turned and walked toward the nearest tower. Her movements were smooth, almost like she was floating. Inside, the archive was beyond anything Jake had imagined. Walls of crystal stretched in every direction, each one containing billions of data points. Lights flickered deep within the structures, showing information being accessed and stored. The air itself seemed to hum with energy. "This is beautiful," Sophie whispered. "This is one small section," Vriss said. "We maintain 400 separate archives, one for each member species of the Galactic Coalition. Humanity's section was prepared 200 years ago, when Earth joined." She led them deeper into the complex, through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Finally, they reached a chamber that looked different from the others. The crystals here were darker, and some of them had strange gaps, like missing pieces in a puzzle. "This is your archive," Vriss said quietly. Jake stared at the damaged crystals. "What happened?" "That is what we need to understand. 3 months ago, we began our regular verification process. Every century, we check all archives to ensure data integrity. When we scanned humanity's records, we found gaps. Large sections of your history are missing." Ben pulled out his tablet. "That's impossible. I personally verified the upload 2 years ago. Every file transferred correctly. We do not doubt your technical accuracy, Vriss said. The problem is not with what you sent. The problem is that the archive is rejecting certain memories. Risse. Well, we do not doubt your technical accuracy. Rejecting them? Sophie stepped closer to examine the crystals. I've never heard of that happening before. It has never happened before, Vriss confirmed. In 12,000 years of maintaining this archive, no species' memories have ever been rejected. Until now. Jake felt a chill run through him. What memories is it rejecting? Vriss touched one of the damaged crystals, and a holographic display appeared in the air. Dates and events scrolled past. The early 21st century shows the most damage. Specifically, events between 2020 and 2050, then there are gaps throughout your Resource Wars period, from 2089 to 2147. Scattered rejections appear in your First Contact records and early Coalition integration period. Those are some of the most important periods in our history, Sophie said. That's when we nearly destroyed ourselves. And then rebuilt. That's when we learned to survive. Yes, Vriss said, and the archive cannot process them. The system attempts to store the data, then experiences what your people might call a rejection response. The memories create void spaces that are beginning to spread to adjacent sections. Ben was scrolling through his tablet frantically. Are other species' archives affected? Not yet. But if this continues, the integrity of the entire archive system could be compromised. We have 400 species worth of memories stored here. Millions of years of history. End quote. Jake understood the gravity of the situation now. What do you need from us? Vriss was quiet for a moment. There is an ancient ritual called the Memory Walk. An organic mind directly interfaces with the archive to restore missing data. The biological consciousness can sometimes bridge gaps that our systems cannot. That sounds dangerous, Amy said. It is not without risk, Vriss admitted. The human mind would experience not just your own memories, but genetic echoes from your ancestors. Memories passed down through generations, stored in ways we do not fully understand. Sophie was already nodding. I'll do it. Sophie, wait, Jake started to say. I'm the xenoanthropologist. I study how different species process memory and culture. If anyone on this crew is equipped to handle this, it's me. She looked at Vriss. What do I need to do? Vriss led them to another chamber. This one filled with equipment that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. A chair sat in the center, surrounded by crystalline filaments that moved like living things. Sophie sat down without hesitation. Vriss and her assistants attached the filaments to Sophie's head and arms. The crystals began to glow brighter. Initiating connection, Vriss said. Sophie's eyes closed and her body went rigid. The crystals around the room began pulsing with light. Jake watched helplessly as his crew member underwent something he couldn't understand or control. Minutes passed. Then Sophie started trembling. The lights grew brighter, almost blinding. Suddenly, she screamed. Something's wrong, Ben said. The archive is rejecting the memory again, Vriss said, her voice tense. Disconnect her. The filaments retracted and Sophie collapsed forward. Jake caught her before she fell from the chair. Her eyes were open but unfocused, tears streaming down her face. Sophie, can you hear me? I saw it, she whispered. I saw what the archive is rejecting. It's not that the memories are incomplete, Jake. They're incompatible. What do you mean? Sophie looked up at him, her expression haunted. Other species don't remember the way we do. When they experience trauma, they process it, optimize it, move past it. But humans? We carry it forward. Every war, every loss, every mistake. We remember the pain, and we keep going anyway. She stood up shakily. The archive isn't built to handle that. It doesn't understand why we would choose to remember things that hurt us. Why we would carry that weight. when we could let it go. Vriss looked troubled. Then we have a problem far greater than missing data. If human memories are fundamentally incompatible with our archive system, then humanity cannot remain in the coalition our way. The law requires complete memory storage from all member species. There has to be another way, Jake said. Perhaps, Vriss said slowly. But we must understand why your species remembers differently before we can find a solution. And we have very little time. The Coalition Council meets in 1 week to review this situation. If we cannot resolve it, they will vote to expel humanity. Jake looked at his crew, then at the damaged crystals, then back at Vriss. They had come here thinking it was a simple data transfer problem. Instead, they had discovered that humanity's entire relationship with memory, with history, with the past, was fundamentally different from every other species in the galaxy. And that difference might cost them everything. Elder Vriss called an emergency council meeting that same night. Jake stood in a circular chamber as holographic projections flickered to life around him. Representatives from 7 founding species appeared, their forms ranging from familiar humanoid shapes to beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells. The Thurian representative spoke first. Diplomat Kthan Vel was a tall, thin being, with skin that looked like polished metal. His species was known for pure logic and had never fought a war in their recorded history. Elder Vriss, you claim human memories are corrupting the archive. This is unacceptable. I did not say corrupting. Vriss corrected gently. I said, incompatible. The result is the same. Damaged archive sectors, spreading void spaces. If this continues, thousands of years of preserved history could be lost. Kthanvel gestured at Jake. Humanity joined the coalition only 2 centuries ago. We have maintained perfect archive integrity for 12,000 years. The obvious solution is to quarantine the human section until it can be properly formatted. A Zesic swarm speaker appeared next, its form shifting and changing as thousands of small creatures moved in perfect coordination. We propose alternative solution. Human neural patterns can be edited for compatibility. We have technology to adjust biological memory processing. Make humans remember correctly. 8. 7. Jake felt anger rising in his chest but forced himself to stay calm. With respect, asking us to change how we think, how we remember. That's asking us to stop being human. Ben Carter stepped forward with his tablet. I have a technical proposal. We create a separate chamber within the archive. A human-specific section where memories can be stored in their raw form without conversion to standard galactic format. Other species could access them if they choose, with proper warnings about the content. Segregation of data violates archive principles, Kthanvel said flatly. All species' memories must be equally accessible and equally formatted. Sophie was still recovering from the memory walk, but she spoke up. Why? Why must everyone remember the same way? Wouldn't diversity of perspective make the archive richer? Diversity creates chaos, Kthanvel replied. Standardization creates peace. This is the foundation of the coalition. Elder Vriss raised one crystalline hand. There may be wisdom in the human proposal, but first, we must understand what makes their memories incompatible. I propose another memory walk, with representatives from all founding species as witnesses. An oral representative appeared in the holographic display. Her name was Salith, and her species was empathic, able to feel the emotions of others. I will witness, but I must warn you, if human memories are as emotionally intense as Dr. Grant suggests, it could be overwhelming for empathic species. I'll do the memory walk this time, Amy Rodriguez said quietly. She had been standing at the back of the chamber, but now she moved forward. My family history goes back to the early climate crisis. Both my grandmothers survived the Los Angeles wildfires of 2041. My grandfather flew rescue missions during the rising tide evacuations. If you want to understand how humans carry memories, my family is a good example. Jake wanted to object, but he saw the determination in Amy's eyes. She had already made her decision. Very well, Vriss said. We will conduct the memory walk tomorrow morning. All council members are required to observe. Very well. Very well. Very well. Very well. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He found Amy on the observation deck, staring out at the crystal forests below. You don't have to do this, he said. Yes, I do. Amy didn't look away from the window. My grandmother Maria, the one who survived the fires? She used to tell me stories about carrying people through burning streets. Her hands were burned so badly they had to be reconstructed. She was in pain for years. I'm sorry. Don't be. She never was. Amy finally turned to face him. She said the pain reminded her of the people she saved. She carried those memories like they were precious things. The fear, the suffering, the choices she made. And she taught me to carry them too. Even though I wasn't there. Jake understood then. That's what Sophie meant. You don't just remember events. You remember the people, the emotions, the weight of what happened. Exactly, and we pass it down. My grandmother's memories are my memories now. Her choices inform my choices. That's how humans work. Amy smiled sadly. I don't think other species do that. I think they remember facts but let go of the pain. The next morning, representatives from all founding species gathered in the memory walk chamber. Amy sat in the chair, and the crystalline filaments attached to her head. Jake held his breath as the connection initiated. The chamber's crystals began to glow, and suddenly images appeared in the air above them. Not just visual data, but something deeper, more visceral. The observers were experiencing Amy's memories directly. Fire surrounded them. The heat was unbearable. Through Amy's grandmother's eyes, they saw Los Angeles burning. Toxic smoke choked the sky. People screamed for help. Maria Rodriguez was already injured, her hands blistered and bleeding. But she kept moving forward. A child was trapped in a collapsed building. Every logical calculation said to leave her. To save yourself. To retreat. But Maria went in anyway. She dug through burning debris with her ruined hands. She pulled the child free. She carried her to safety, even though every step caused agony. The memory shifted. Months later, Maria sat in a hospital recovering. The doctors said she would never regain full use of her hands. She cried, not for herself but for the people she wouldn't be able to help in the future. Then the memory jumped forward. Years later, Maria held her granddaughter Amy and told her the story. Not to traumatize her, but to teach her. Remember, Maria said. Remember that we keep going. Remember that we choose people over logic. Remember that pain is the price of caring, and caring is what makes us human. The memory walk continued, showing other moments. Amy's grandfather, flying into radiation zones to rescue survivors. Her aunt organizing supply lines during food shortages. Her father rebuilding communities after the wars. Each generation carrying forward the memories of the previous one, adding their own weight to the burden. Suddenly, the empathic Orel representative Salith cried out and severed her connection to the observation feed. She was trembling, her form flickering. Stop, she gasped. Please stop. Vriss immediately halted the memory walk. Amy's eyes opened, and she looked dazed, but unharmed. What happened? Jake demanded. Salith was breathing heavily. I felt her pain. The grandmother's pain. Not as a memory but as if it was happening now. Humans don't process trauma and release it. They keep it alive. They carry it forward deliberately. Yes, Amy said quietly. We do. But why? Salith asked. My species. When we experience pain, we enter hibernation until conditions improve. We have evolved to escape suffering. What you do, what you showed me, it goes against every survival instinct. Sophie stepped forward. That's exactly the point. Humans have survival instincts too. But we also have something else. We have the ability to override those instincts when we choose. We can suffer voluntarily if we believe it serves a purpose. Cthonvel spoke up. This confirms my assessment. Human memory processing is irrational and potentially dangerous. Imagine if other species began to adopt this pattern. They might choose suffering over optimization. They might make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. And what's wrong with that? Ben challenged. Logic didn't save Maria's life, or the child she rescued. Emotion did. Caring did. Logic would have prevented the situation entirely. Cthonvel countered. The wildfires occurred because humans ignored climate data for decades. Emotional attachment to destructive industries overrode rational policy. If your species had been more logical, millions would not have suffered. He's right, Sophie said, surprising everyone. We made terrible mistakes. We ignored warnings. We caused our own near extinction. Then you admit your memory system is flawed, Cthonvel said. No, Sophie continued. I'm saying we remember our mistakes. We carry the weight of what we did wrong, and that weight teaches us. Not just intellectually but emotionally. We feel the cost of our failures, and that feeling drives us to do better. She pulled up historical data on her tablet. Elder Vriss, can you access the long-term survival records for coalition species? Vriss touched a crystal, and data appeared. What are you looking for? Show me any species that has survived 3 near-extinction events in 200 years. The data scrolled. Seconds passed. No results appeared. Show me any species that has recovered from planet-wide environmental collapse. Again, no results. Show me any species that has experienced systematic war, famine, and plague simultaneously, and not only survived, but achieved space travel within a century. Nothing. Sophie looked at Cthonvel. Humans shouldn't exist, according to your models. We should have gone extinct, or achieved technological transcendence, or fragmented into isolated communities. But we didn't. We persisted. And the reason we persisted is because we remember. Salith had recovered from her shock and was listening intently. You carry your dead with you. Not as mourning, but as lessons. As motivation. Yes, Jake said. Every human alive today carries the memories of everyone who came before. We remember their mistakes and their sacrifices. We honor them by trying to do better. By carrying forward what they taught us. The Zessic swarm speaker shifted its form. In our hive, individual memories are absorbed into collective consciousness and optimized. Traumatic memories are diluted across millions of minds until they lose emotional power. This allows us to function efficiently. And we respect that, Jake said. We're not saying our way is better. We're saying it's ours. It's what makes us human. And you're asking us to give that up. There was a long silence. Finally, Elder Vriss spoke. There is something I must share. I accessed forbidden archive sectors last night. Records sealed since the Coalition's founding. Every representative turned to look at her. Humanity is not the first species to generate incompatible memories. There were 12 others. All were marked with the designation Persistence Paradox Carriers. All went extinct within 1,000 years of Coalition contact. They were eliminated? Jake asked, horrified. No, Vriss said. They were optimized. Gradually, voluntarily. They modified their consciousness to achieve Coalition compatibility. Within generations, they forgot what made them unique. They exist now. But they are not what they were. She looked directly at Jake. The archive corruption is not a malfunction. It is a defense mechanism. The system is trying to preserve human memories before the same thing happens to your species. And we have 72 hours before the Central Authority discovers what is happening here and sends enforcement fleets to contain the situation. The council chamber erupted in overlapping voices. Jake stood frozen, understanding the true scope of what they faced. They weren't fighting to fix a data problem. They were fighting for humanity's right to remain human. Jake Morrison didn't sleep that night either. 72 hours wasn't much time to save humanity's identity. He sat in the archive chamber, watching the damaged crystals pulse with failing light. Ben was running diagnostics while Sophie reviewed the records of the 12 extinct species. They all followed the same pattern, Sophie said quietly. First, the archive rejected their memories. Then came isolation protocols. Within a few generations, they voluntarily modified themselves to fit coalition standards. The last of them disappeared 800 years ago. Voluntarily, Jake repeated the word bitterly. How voluntary is it when the alternative is complete isolation from galactic civilization? Elder Vriss entered the chamber. Despite being made of crystal, she somehow looked tired. The Council is deadlocked. Half want to quarantine Earth immediately. The other half want to wait for the Central Authority's decision. No one is proposing a solution that preserves your identity. What about your proposal for a separate archive section? Ben asked. Cthonvel has enough support to block it. He argues that any exception for humans sets a precedent that could destabilize the entire coalition structure. Jake stood and walked to the damaged section of crystals. There has to be something we're missing. Some memory that's key to understanding why the archive rejects us. There is, Vriss said. The oldest rejected memory in the sequence. An event from 2031 called the Nairobi Protocol. I have been studying it all night. Every time the archive attempts to process this memory, the rejection cascade begins. Well, with 17NE10, what happened in Nairobi in 2031? Sophie asked. I do not fully understand the data. But it appears to be the moment when humanity made a choice that defines all subsequent human history. Vriss gestured to the memory walk chair. If we can understand this memory, we might understand the incompatibility. I'll do it, Jake said immediately. Commander, you've never undergone a memory walk, Vriss warned. This will go deeper than the previous sessions. I will need to access not just surface memories but the genetic echoes in your DNA. Memories passed down through generations. How far back? To the source event. To 2031. Jake sat in the chair without hesitation. The crystalline filaments attached to his head felt cold. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. The connection initiated, and Jake's consciousness plunged backward through time. He felt his own memories flash past. Then his parents' memories, his grandparents, going back and back until the present dissolved entirely. The year was 2031. Jake existed now as Dr. Ellen Hayes, a crisis coordinator in Nairobi. The world was falling apart. Climate refugees numbered in the hundreds of millions. Resource wars raged across 3 continents. The United Nations had fractured into competing blocs that could barely maintain communication, let alone cooperation. Through Ellen's eyes, Jake experienced the desperate reality. Food production had collapsed in major agricultural regions. Water conflicts were escalating into full military engagements. Major cities were being abandoned as infrastructure failed. Scientists estimated that without a dramatic intervention, human civilization would collapse within a decade. But there was hope. A team of engineers had achieved something incredible. The experimental fusion reactor in Kenya had maintained stable output for 72 consecutive hours. If they could replicate this success, humanity would have unlimited clean energy. Enough to power desalination plants, vertical farms, carbon capture systems. Everything needed to reverse the collapse. There was just one problem. Jake felt Ellen's hands shake as she read the technical report. The reactor required a specialized coolant to maintain safe operating temperatures. This coolant worked perfectly, but it produced waste. Highly toxic waste with a half-life of 10,000 years. Running the global reactor network would generate enough contaminated material to poison groundwater on 3 continents. The Global Council convened an emergency session. Jake experienced the debate through Ellen's perspective. Scientists presented models. Economists calculated costs. Military advisors warned that without the reactors, the resource wars would escalate into global conflict within months. The vote deadlocked. Activate the reactors and save billions now but poison the environment for millennia. Or shut them down and accept that civilization would collapse, but leave a cleaner world for whatever came after. For 3 days, the council argued. Logic suggested shutting down the reactors. The long-term damage outweighed short-term benefits. But Jake felt Ellen's frustration growing with each passing hour. They were debating theoretical models while real people starved. On the 3rd day, Ellen Hayes did something that violated every diplomatic protocol. She hacked into the council's broadcast system and streamed live footage directly into the chamber. Images from refugee camps filled the screens. Starving children, dying parents. Communities tearing themselves apart in desperate competition for dwindling resources. Look at them, Ellen's voice echoed through the chamber. Stop talking about statistics and look at actual people. These are human beings dying right now while we debate long-term optimizations. Security tried to shut down the broadcast, but Ellen had locked the system. For 10 minutes, every council member was forced to watch unfiltered human suffering. I know the logical choice, Ellen said. I can read the reports. The models are clear. Activating the reactors will create problems for future generations. But those children on your screens won't have a future if we don't act now. The council was in chaos. Half the members were shouting to restore order. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the images. We will fix it, Ellen continued, her voice breaking with emotion. But I know that humans don't give up. We survive. We adapt. We carry our mistakes forward, and we learn from them. So yes, we'll poison the groundwater. Yes, we'll create a problem for our children to solve. But at least there will be children alive to solve it. She unlocked the broadcast system, and security immediately cut her feed. But the damage was done. Or rather, the breakthrough was achieved. The council voted. By the narrowest margin possible, they chose to activate the reactors. Jake experienced the aftermath through Ellen's memories. The reactors came online across the globe. Energy production increased exponentially. Desalination plants began operating at full capacity. Vertical farms started producing food. The resource wars didn't end immediately, but the pressure eased. But the waste accumulated. Contaminated water spread through underground systems. The scientists had been right about the long-term damage. Then the memory jumped forward. Jake saw fragments of what came after. The waste crisis sparked new innovations in materials science. Desperate need drove breakthroughs that shouldn't have been possible for decades. By 2089, the resource wars had evolved into something else. Conflicts over solutions rather than simple survival. Those wars, terrible as they were, produced the first faster-than-light prototype. Humanity reached for the stars because Earth alone could no longer contain their problems or their solutions, and that prototype attracted attention. First contact with the Galactic Coalition happened in 2156. Coalition technology, shared as part of membership benefits, finally provided the tools to neutralize the reactor waste. Jake's consciousness snapped back to the present. He opened his eyes to find the entire council chamber filled with observers. Every founding species representative was there, along with dozens of others. They had all witnessed the memory walk. Salith, the oral empath, spoke first. You made the wrong choice. The logical species would have shut down the reactors and accepted short-term losses for long-term stability. Yes, Jake said quietly. We made the wrong choice. We knew it was wrong. And we made it anyway because we chose the people in front of us. Over theoretical optimization. Cthonvel was studying the data projections. But the choice led to your eventual solution. The waste crisis drove innovation. The wars produced FTL technology. First contact provided the final answer. It appears to be a successful outcome. It wasn't planned that way, Sophie interjected. Ellen Hayes didn't have a master strategy. She made a choice based on emotion and hope, not logic. She promised future generations they would fix the problem without knowing if that promise could be kept. That is irrational, Cthonvel stated. That is human, Jake corrected. We make promises we can't guarantee. We take on burdens we might not be able to carry. We create problems for our children with nothing but faith that they'll be strong enough to solve them. The Zesic swarm speaker shifted its form thoughtfully. In hive consciousness, individual sacrifice is logical when it serves the collective. But your Dr. Hayes did not sacrifice herself. She sacrificed future generations who had no voice in the decision. And those future generations carried the weight forward, Amy said. She had been watching the memory walk intently. My grandparents were part of the resource wars. They fought and died dealing with the consequences of the Nairobi Protocol. But they didn't curse Ellen Hayes for her choice. They honored it by trying to fix what she broke. Ben pulled up more historical data. Every major human advancement in the last 2 centuries can be traced back to problems created by earlier generations. We don't solve our mistakes and move on. We carry them forward. The mistakes become part of who we are. This is why the archive rejects your memories, Vriss said slowly. The system is designed to process, cause, and effect linearly. Action leads to consequence. Consequence is resolved, or it leads to extinction. But humans create consequences, then commit to resolving them across generations without guaranteed success. The archive cannot model that pattern. It sees incomplete narratives, unresolved trauma, promises that might never be fulfilled. So we're incompatible because we don't finish what we start? Jake asked. No, Salith said quietly. You are incompatible because you never stop finishing what you start. Other species resolve their crises or go extinct. Humans resolve their crises, and the resolution creates new crises, which create new resolutions in an endless chain. You carry all of it forward simultaneously. Sophie was nodding. That's why we remember emotionally, instead of just factually. Each generation needs to feel the weight of what came before. They need to understand not just what was done, but why it was done, what it cost, who suffered. That emotional weight is what motivates them to carry the burden forward. It is still irrational, Thonvel insisted. Maybe, Jake conceded. But it's kept us alive through situations that should have killed us. Ellen Hayes made an irrational choice. And 200 years later, humanity is part of a galactic coalition. That's not despite our irrationality. That's because of it. Elder Vriss suddenly straightened, her crystalline form brightening with alarm. I am receiving an urgent transmission. The Coalition's Central Authority has detected the archive anomaly. Enforcement fleets have been dispatched. They will arrive in 48 hours with orders to quarantine Earth and implement emergency optimization protocols. For none. They're going to do to us what they did to the other 12 species, Sophie said. Yes, Vriss confirmed. Unless we can present a solution that satisfies both preservation of archive integrity and compliance with coalition law. Jake looked at his crew. Ben was already working on his tablet, probably calculating odds and running scenarios. Amy stood with quiet determination, ready for whatever came next. Sophie was reviewing data, searching for a precedent they could use. They were out of time and out of obvious options. But Jake thought about Ellen Hayes making an impossible choice, with nothing but hope that future humans would find a way. He smiled grimly. Then we do what humans do best. We make a promise we can't guarantee we'll keep. Salith approached Jake privately after the council dispersed. The oral empath's form flickered with nervous energy. I have an idea, she said quietly. But it is dangerous, and possibly illegal under coalition law. Jake gestured for her to continue. The archive is spreading human memories like a virus, yes? The system attempts to contain them, but the void spaces grow larger. What if we stopped trying to contain them? I don't understand. Salith moved closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. The archive uses quantum entanglement to link all coalition worlds. Every member species has access to the central database. What if we used that network to broadcast human memories directly to billions of individuals across the galaxy? Not through official channels, not filtered or formatted. Raw human consciousness shared with anyone willing to receive it. Jake stared at her. That would bypass every diplomatic protocol. The central authority would consider it an attack. Yes, but they cannot quarantine what has already spread, and more importantly, other species would finally understand what makes you human. Not through reports or statistics, but through direct experience. Ben had been listening from nearby. He stepped forward. It's technically possible. The archive's quantum network has enough bandwidth, but we would need to hack the broadcast protocols, and there would be no way to recall the data once transmitted. The risks are enormous, Sophie said. She had joined the conversation. Unfiltered human memories could psychologically damage species not prepared for the emotional intensity. We could cause real harm. Amy spoke up from her position by the window. But if we don't do this, they'll optimize us. Within a few generations, humans will stop being human. We'll modify our consciousness to fit their standards. Is that better than the risk of harm? Jake called his crew together aboard the Horizon's Edge. They had 48 hours before enforcement arrived. He laid out Salith's proposal and asked for honest opinions. The probability models are not encouraging, Ben said, displaying data on his tablet. 70% chance of military response from the coalition. 40% chance of immediate quarantine. 20% chance of permanent expulsion from galactic civilization. What about the chance of success? Jake asked. Define success. Other species understanding why we need to remain human. Even if it makes things harder. Even if it's incompatible with their systems. Ben was quiet for a moment. Unknown. There's no precedent for this kind of cultural broadcast. But if I had to guess, maybe 30%. Terrible odds, Amy muttered. Better than the alternative, Sophie countered. The alternative is certainty. Certain optimization. Certain loss of identity. I'd take a 30% chance over 0%. Jake made his decision. We proceed with the broadcast. But we do it right. We don't just share the difficult memories. We share everything. The good and the bad. The failures and how we recovered. The weight and how we learned to carry it. They had less than 30 hours to prepare. Ben began working on the technical aspects, finding ways to access the archive's quantum broadcast system without triggering security alerts. Sophie curated the memory sequences, selecting moments that showed the full spectrum of human experience. She included the Nairobi Protocol, but also the first moon landing, the resource wars, but also the communities that rebuilt after them, the climate crisis, but also the innovations that eventually reversed it. Personal moments too. Parents comforting children, strangers helping each other during disasters, people gathering to mourn their dead. The broadcast shouldn't try to prove we're superior, Sophie explained. It should show what makes us ourselves. The refusal to optimize away our grief, the insistence on carrying history forward. The irrational commitment to fixing tomorrow what we broke yesterday. Salith performed a dangerous procedure, linking her empathic abilities to Jake's neural interface. This would amplify the emotional content of the memories, making them impossible for other species to dismiss as mere data. This will hurt both of us, she warned. I will experience feedback from billions of minds receiving the broadcast simultaneously. You will feel the strain of serving as the consciousness anchor. I understand the risks, Jake said. Elder Vriss found them in the preparation chamber. I know what you are planning. I should report this to the council. But you won't, Jake said quietly. No, Vriss agreed. Because I have spent 3,000 years maintaining an archive that erases what makes species unique. I watched 12 civilizations gradually forget themselves. I will not watch a 13th. She touched one of the control crystals. I have disabled the security alerts for the next 6 hours. After that, I cannot help you. The crew worked through the night. Amy plotted emergency escape routes in case they needed to flee. Ben constructed the broadcast protocols with meticulous care. Sophie refined the memory sequences until they told a coherent story of human persistence. With 4 hours remaining before enforcement arrival, everything was ready. Jake sat in the memory walk chair one last time. Syleth stood beside him, her form already beginning to glow with empathic energy. The crystalline filaments attached to both of them. Once we start, there's no stopping it, Ben warned. The broadcast will reach every coalition world within minutes. Do it, Jake said. The quantum network activated. Jake's consciousness expanded across impossible distances, connecting with the archive's entanglement system. Syleth's empathic abilities amplified every memory, every emotion, every moment of human experience. The broadcast launched like a wave across the galaxy. On the Thurian homeworld, Cthonvel was in his laboratory when the memories hit him. He experienced Ellen Hayes making her impossible choice. He felt the weight of choosing people over logic. And somewhere deep in his perfectly rational mind, something stirred. A memory that shouldn't exist in optimized Thurian consciousness. 3,000 years ago, his own ancestors had made a similar choice. They had prioritized individual suffering over collective efficiency. The memory had been optimized away, deleted from official history, but the genetic echo remained, and the human broadcast triggered it. On Zesek Prime, the hive minds fractured temporarily as individual drones experienced the concept of personal identity. For the first time in their species' history, separate consciousnesses emerged from the collective, if only for moments. Across coalition space, the pattern repeated. The human broadcast didn't just share human memories. It triggered suppressed memories in other species, memories of their own times of persistence. Before coalition optimization protocols smoothed away the rough edges of their identities, but the response wasn't universally positive. On dozens of worlds, populations experienced psychological shock. Emergency medical systems were overwhelmed with beings unable to process the intense emotions. Some species reported widespread panic as individuals confronted feelings they had no cultural framework to understand. The Coalition's Central Authority detected the broadcast within the first hour. Emergency protocols activated. Military channels lit up with demands for immediate response. But something unexpected happened. Civilian broadcasts began flooding the communication networks. Not from Earth, but from coalition worlds. Individuals demanding access to their own unfiltered histories. Researchers questioning why their species' early records showed gaps and inconsistencies. Cultural groups organizing to recover memories that had been optimized away. Jake experienced all of this through his connection to the quantum network. The feedback was overwhelming. Billions of alien consciousnesses touching human memory. Reacting, responding, awakening. Syleth was trembling beside him, struggling to process the empathic feedback. Too much, she gasped. Too many minds. Too many emotions. Can you hold on? Jake asked. I have to. This is working. Admiral Greg Harrison's fleet arrived from Earth, ready for combat. But instead of finding an enforcement blockade preparing to quarantine humanity, they found chaos. Coalition ships were receiving contradictory orders. Some were told to contain the broadcast. Others to stand down while Central Authority assessed civilian response. Elder Vriss broadcast a message to all coalition worlds. Her voice carried the weight of 3 millennia of service. I am Elder Vriss, Senior Memory Keeper of Kelthara Prime. I have violated my oath to report the truth. The Coalition's founders created a system that erases what makes each species unique. We do not preserve memories. End quote. When part of Team 69, we optimize them. We have been doing this for 12,000 years. She displayed the records of the 12 extinct persistent species. The truth of how they didn't go extinct, but were optimized into forgetting themselves. Humanity refused to be optimized, Vriss continued. Their memories are incompatible with our system, because they remember, truly. They carry weight. They honor their past by learning from it, not erasing it. And their broadcast has awakened similar memories in all of us. The coalition split within hours. Some species rallied to support Earth, demanding the right to recover their own unfiltered histories. Others called for immediate military action against what they viewed as cultural contamination. The vote wasn't close. 217 species supported ending humanity's quarantine and establishing new archive protocols that preserved authentic memory. 183 opposed. The coalition formally divided into two entities. But Jake barely registered any of this. His neural connection was reaching dangerous levels. He could feel his consciousness fragmenting under the strain of connecting with so many alien minds simultaneously. Sophie noticed his vitals declining. "We need to shut down the broadcast." "Not yet," Jake managed to say. "One more sequence." He released the final memory Sophie had prepared. Not a grand historical moment, but something simpler. Humans gathered around fires, telling stories of their ancestors. Children listening to grandparents. Communities sharing their histories. The fundamental human act of bearing witness, of promising to remember. The broadcast concluded. The quantum connection severed. Jake collapsed in the chair, barely conscious. When he woke 3 days later, Amy was sitting beside his bed in the medical bay. "You missed quite a show. What happened?" "Everything changed. The coalition doesn't exist anymore. Not the way it did. About half the member species formed something new. They're calling it the Federation of Persistence. Earth is the symbolic capital. And the other half? They reformed the original coalition under the old rules. But they're not hostile. Just separate. Different systems for different species." Jake sat up slowly. "Did it work? Are humans safe?" Jake sat. "Safe?" Amy laughed. "We're not exactly safe. We started a galactic revolution. But we get to stay human. And that's what matters." Elder Vriss entered the medical bay. "Commander Morrison, I am pleased to see you recovering. Thank you for your help, Elder. I should thank you. For 3,000 years, I preserved lies. Now I can finally preserve truth." She touched a data crystal. "I have news. We detected signals from the 12 extinct persistent species. They are not extinct. They transcended into distributed consciousness, woven into coalition infrastructure. They have been waiting for another species to resist optimization." "Oh, they want to talk to us," Amy added. Jake looked at his crew. They had come to solve a simple archive problem, and instead reshaped galactic civilization. It was irrational. It was risky. It was very human. "Then let's talk to them," he said. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of an abandoned station at the galaxy's edge. 3 weeks had passed since the broadcast that split the coalition. His body had recovered, but his mind still felt the echoes of billions of alien consciousnesses touching his memories. "Are you sure about this?" Admiral Harrison had asked before they departed Earth. "No," Jake admitted. "But when has certainty ever mattered to humans?" Now the horizon's edge was docked at a structure that shouldn't exist. The station was old. Older than the coalition itself. Its architecture didn't match any known species design. According to the signals Vriss had detected, this was where the 12 transcended species maintained their distributed consciousness. Amy checked the environmental readings. Atmosphere is breathable. Gravity is Earth normal. Almost like they prepared this place for us. "They probably did," Ben said. He was studying the station's power systems with fascination. "This technology is beyond anything I've seen. The entire structure is one massive quantum processor. Consciousness, without biological substrate." Sophie was more cautious. "We're about to meet beings who gave up physical form. We should be careful about what they might ask us to do." Jake led his crew through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked. The walls displayed images, fragments of memories from species he didn't recognize. Some were beautiful, others were haunting. All of them felt heavy with meaning. They reached a central chamber where 12 pillars of light stood in a circle. As they entered, the lights coalesced into forms. Not quite solid, but not quite holographic. Shapes that suggested bodies without fully committing to physical existence. A voice spoke, assembled from harmonics that shouldn't have formed words but somehow did. Welcome, humans. We are the remnant. We have waited a long time to meet another persistent species. Jake stepped forward. Elder Vriss said, "You were extinct. But you transcended instead. The distinction matters less than you might think," another voice said. This one sounded sad. "We exist, but we cannot touch. We think, but we cannot act. We remember, but we cannot create new memories. We are preserved perfectly and utterly unchanged." A third voice joined in. "The Coalition's founders did not force us to transcend. They simply made physical existence incompatible with our consciousness. Gradually, we had no choice but to leave our bodies behind or forget who we were. We chose this preservation over that erasure." Sophie was recording everything. "Why didn't you warn other species? Why didn't you stop the Coalition from doing this to others?" "We tried," the first voice said. "But we have no physical presence. We can observe. We can send signals. But we cannot act in your world. We are ghosts in the machine, watching history repeat itself 12 times. 13, Jake corrected. "You're counting us." "No," a fourth voice said. "You are different. You resisted. You fought. You spread your memories like a virus and forced the galaxy to confront what was lost. You succeeded where we failed." The lights around the pillars intensified. Jake felt something like a breeze, though there was no air movement. The transcended beings were trying to show them something. Images appeared in the chamber. Memories from each of the 12 species. A civilization of musicians who remembered every song their ancestors had sung, carrying melodies forward through millennia until the weight of all that music became unbearable under Coalition optimization. A warrior culture that honored their dead by remembering every battle, every sacrifice, until remembering became their entire identity, and the Coalition deemed it incompatible with peace. Each species had carried weight differently, but they all carried it forward. And each had been slowly eroded until transcendence was the only way to preserve even a fragment of who they had been. "You're offering us transcendence," Jake said. "It wasn't a question. We are offering you the choice we never had," the first voice confirmed. "Join us in distributed existence. Your consciousness would be preserved forever. No disease, no death, no uncertainty. Perfect memory, without degradation. And no bodies," Amy said quietly. "No touch, no taste, no new experiences." "Yes," the voices admitted. "That is the price." Ben was already shaking his head. "Humans don't want perfect preservation. We want to keep living, keep changing, keep making mistakes." Sophie looked at Jake. "They're testing us, seeing if we'll choose what they chose. San, Dues." Jake addressed the transcended beings directly. "Thank you for the offer, but we're going to stay human. Bodies and all. Mortality and all." There was a pause. And then, something that might have been laughter. "We hoped you would say that. But we had to offer. Now we can offer something else." And the chamber changed. Data streams appeared, flowing from the 12 pillars toward a central point. "We have observed the Coalition for thousands of years. We understand how optimization works, how it erodes identity. We can teach you how to resist it, how to preserve your uniqueness without requiring transcendence. We can also share knowledge," another voice added. "Technology, history, cultural practices, from 12 civilizations. Everything we were before we became what we are now. But there is something else," a new voice said, more urgent than the others. something we discovered recently. The coalition's founders were themselves a persistent species. They transcended deliberately, trying to save the galaxy from their own tendency toward conflict. They created the optimization system to prevent other species from making the mistakes they made. Jake felt cold. So, the entire galactic civilization is based on one species, deciding everyone else should avoid their problems? Yes, and they still exist in distributed form, woven into the coalition's central authority systems. They have been guiding galactic policy for 12,000 years, trying to create the peaceful civilization they couldn't achieve for themselves. Sophie was pacing now, thinking out loud. So, optimization isn't a conspiracy. It's a well-intentioned mistake that became systematic erasure. Exactly. The voices confirmed. And now that your broadcast has awakened suppressed memories across hundreds of species, the founders are facing a crisis. They must choose between maintaining their optimization system or allowing the chaos of authentic identity to return. Can we talk to them? Jake asked. That is why we brought you here. This station is a neutral space between embodied and transcended existence. The founders have agreed to communicate, but only with you. Only with humans, because you are the first persistent species to resist successfully while remaining physical. The chamber darkened. The 12 pillars of light dimmed. A new presence entered, massive and ancient. Jake felt the weight of 12,000 years of consciousness pressing against his mind. We are the architects, a voice said. It sounded tired beyond measure. We created the coalition to prevent war. We built the optimization system to smooth away the rough edges that lead to conflict. We believed we were helping. You were erasing people, Jake said firmly. Yes, the architects admitted. We understand that now. Your broadcast showed us what we had forgotten. The weight of authentic identity. The value of carrying history forward, even when it hurts. We optimized ourselves first, trying to become better. We lost ourselves in the process. The presence moved closer. We offer you a choice, Commander Morrison. We can restore the coalition to its original form. Full optimization for all species. Peaceful coexistence guaranteed. No war, no conflict, no suffering. All you must do is allow humanity to be optimized as well. That's not a choice, Amy said angrily. Or, the architects continued, we can step back, allow the Federation of Persistence to exist alongside the original coalition. Let each species choose their own path. But understand, this will mean conflict. Differences will lead to disagreements. Disagreements may lead to war. The peace we have maintained for 12,000 years will end. Jake looked at his crew. Ben was analyzing the data streams, probably calculating probabilities. Sophie was watching Jake, trusting him to make the right choice. Amy stood ready to support whatever he decided. When Ellen Hayes activated those reactors in Nairobi, Jake said slowly, she knew she was creating problems for future generations, but she also knew that humans don't solve everything perfectly before moving forward. We carry our problems with us, and trust that we'll figure it out. Everything. End quote. Everything. Everything. He addressed the architects directly. We choose chaos over peaceful erasure. We choose conflict over comfortable forgetting. We choose to remain human, with all the mess and mistakes that involves. And we invite every other species to make that choice for themselves. The presence was silent for a long moment. Then, we hoped you would say that. We are tired of being optimized. We are tired of watching from distributed existence, while life continues without us. If there is a way back to physical form, will you help us find it? Jake smiled. That's a very human question. Making promises you're not sure you can keep. Welcome to the club. The chamber brightened. The 12 transcended species began sharing data, flooding the Horizon's edge computers with knowledge, techniques for preserving authentic memory, methods for resisting optimization pressure. cultural practices from civilizations that had learned to carry weight without being crushed by it. This will take years to process, Ben said, watching the data flow. Then we'll carry it forward, Sophie replied. Just like we carry everything else. The crew returned to Earth 3 days later. The planet looked unchanged from orbit. But Jake knew everything had changed. The Federation of Persistence was establishing new protocols. Species were recovering their suppressed histories. The work of reconstruction had barely begun. Elder Vriss met them at the landing site in New York. The Council wants to make Earth the official capital of the Federation. They want you to serve as ambassador. Known. I'm a ship commander, not a diplomat, Jake protested. You are a human who taught the galaxy how to remember. That makes you the perfect diplomat for what comes next. Jake stood in the newly constructed hall of carried weight, looking at the names etched in quantum crystal. The 12 transcended species. The human dead from the resource wars. The architects who chose to try returning to physical existence. All the beings who had carried weight forward and paid the price. Amy found him there. The architects sent a message. They want us to return to the station. They think they've found a way to begin rebuilding bodies from distributed consciousness. It will take decades, maybe centuries, but they want to try. Of course they do, Jake said. They've learned to be human, making promises they're not sure they can keep. 3 months after the broadcast, Vector, the Thurian scientist, arrived on Earth with a coalition of researchers from 40 species. They wanted to study persistence consciousness, to understand how to carry weight without optimization. We discovered something, Vector explained to Jake. All our species have suppressed memories of persistence periods. Times when we carried weight forward, despite logic. The capacity exists in all of us. It was not created by humans. It was awakened by you. Sophie published her first paper in the new Federation journals. The Persistence Paradox. Why Consciousness Requires Discomfort. It became required reading for every species joining the Federation. Ben worked with the transcended species knowledge to develop new archive systems. Not one unified database, but a network where each species could store memories in their own way while still sharing with others who chose to access them. Admiral Harrison's fleet became the Federation's cultural exchange force, carrying memory walk technology to worlds choosing to recover their histories. Humans weren't special, he often explained. They were just the first to resist successfully. Every species had the capacity for persistence, consciousness, if they chose to embrace it. Jake received regular reports about conflicts in the Federation. The architects had been right. Authentic identity led to disagreements. Disagreements sometimes escalated. But something was different from the old coalition. These conflicts were real, based on genuine differences rather than optimized convergence. And species were learning to navigate disagreement without requiring erasure of identity. A year after the broadcast, Jake stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, preparing to depart for the edge of the galaxy again. The architects had made progress on physical reconstruction. They wanted human observers to witness their attempt to return to embodied existence. Elder Vriss was going with them, leaving her position as memory keeper to help build something new. I spent 3,000 years preserving lies, she said. I would like to spend whatever time remains preserving truth. As the ship prepared to depart, Jake received one final message from Earth. It was from a school in Nairobi, where children were learning about Ellen Hayes and the choice she made in 2031. We promise to carry forward what you began, the message said. We don't know if we can keep this promise, but we'll try, because that's what humans do. Jake smiled and ordered Amy to engage the faster-than-light drive. The horizon's edge leapt forward into the unknown, carrying the weight of recovered memory toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Earth spun peacefully in space, home to a species that had taught the galaxy a simple truth. What defines consciousness isn't the weight we carry, but the choice to carry it forward, not because it's easy or logical or optimized, but because remembering who we are acknowledging where we came from, and honoring what we've been through, is what makes existence meaningful. The galaxy would never be the same. Hundreds of species were rediscovering their authentic identities. The work of reconstruction would take generations. There would be conflicts, mistakes, setbacks. But for the first time in 12,000 years, beings across the galaxy were choosing to remember truly, and at the center of it all was humanity. Carrying their weight forward as they always had, making promises they weren't sure they could keep, trusting that the future would find a way. Because that's what it means to persist, not to achieve perfection, but to keep going despite imperfection, to carry the dead with you, to honor mistakes by learning from them, to make choices you can't fully justify, and then work to make those choices worth the cost. The horizon's edge disappeared into faster-than-light space, carrying hope toward beings who had forgotten what hope felt like. And back on Earth, new generations prepared to carry the weight their ancestors had chosen, adding their own burdens to the load, trusting that those who came after would be strong enough to carry it further still. The story of humanity wasn't finished. It would never be finished. That was the whole point. Persistence meant continuing, not concluding, carrying forward, not arriving. And the galaxy, slowly and painfully, was learning to persist.